Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would review this little video that I found very particularly interesting. And this is going to be over the topic of the very good rematch that I believe will be happening here in a couple of months. I believe that the date that this fight ends up happening on, I believe that it is March 18th, somewhere around there. And of course, the fight that I'm going to be talking about is that of the Brian Castano versus Jermell Charlo rematch. And of course, the first fight I thought was a very, very great fight. Of course, it was scored I believe, a majority draw when it came down to it. I don't remember exactly when the fight happened last year, but it was a very tough competitive fight. A lot of people, of course, thought that the draw was a bit controversial. I personally thought that maybe you could debate it as a bit controversial because I personally thought that I probably think that Brian Castano did enough to deserve the decision. I thought that he probably should have won the fight either 7 rounds to 5 or 8 rounds to 4. But I can maybe see how certain people would have scored it a draw because, of course, Jermell Charlo, he was able to hurt and back up Brian Castano a couple of times a little bit later on. The big question is who is going to win this mega rematch overall and going to become the complete undisputed champion of the 154-pound division. And in my opinion, I think that both of these fighters, I think that they're really going to have to make a certain amount of adjustments in order to win the fight. I think that when it comes to Jermell Charlo, I think that, to be quite honest with you, and this is my opinion, and a certain amount of people may disagree, I actually think that Brian Castano, I actually think that he's the more talented fighter of the two. But I'm not 100% sure if I can necessarily quite pick him as of yet to win the rematch, just because I think that a big part of the reason why the first fight was scored so closely, when really it could have been a blowout. I don't want to say a blowout, but I think that if Brian Castano, I think that if he would have been a little bit more confident in his abilities and also used a little bit more lateral movement and also maybe would have pushed Jermell Charlo a little bit more in that of the latter rounds, I think all in all that he probably would have won the fight easily on the scorecards. But he did let Jermell Charlo get back into the fight a little bit more than what he probably needed to. And both the Charlo brothers, they've been known sometimes to sometimes get a little bit of, I don't want to say controversial, but they do get a little bit of the help from the judges here and there, if you want to say that. Just like when certain people allege it with Canelo Alvarez, the Charlo brothers have a very, very similar thing, but it just is what it is. You expect that from big assets in boxing, and they're very, very big assets. They have a decent fan base when it comes down to it. So boxing, at the end of the day, they do want Jermell Charlo to win this match. At least all in all, when it comes down to it, people overall that see Jermell Charlo as a decent asset. So he is going to be the A side in this fight. There is no doubt about that. If Brian Castano, in my opinion, if he is going to win this match, he's going to have to really get in there on Jermell Charlo early. He's going to have to make this a very rough and tough fight, just like he did in the first part of the fight. And Brian Castano, the big question also is with him, can he possibly hurt Jermell Charlo once again? Can he even knock him out? Can he go to that degree? I think, to be quite honest with you, and a certain amount of people may disagree with me here, I actually think that there's a decent chance that either of these gentlemen could get the knockout. A lot of people, of course, take a look at Jermell Charlo with his power, and a certain amount of people, they of course look at him as a knockout artist. But Brian Castano, he also has very, very decent punching power. He also is a person that was able to hurt Jermell Charlo a multitude of times in that fight. I'm going to explain in this video what I think both fighters are going to need to do and who I probably would predict at the current moment in time. But it's also going to be a little bit difficult. I'm not going to give my official prediction until probably a week before the fight because I haven't really watched that rematch ever since it had happened. But I would have to see it. But anyways, let's get into the conversation. Let's see what Mr. Fannon has to say. Let's get into it.
Right, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fannon, and in this video, we're going to talk about one of the best fights coming up in the next 2 months, and that is the huge rematch between Jermell Charlo and Brian Castano. This time, Brian Castano, who believes that he was robbed the last fight, I don't, says that he is doing something special in this one that I don't know if he'll be able to.
I think all in all that it was not the greatest of decisions, but it is what it is. I thought that Brian Castano clearly probably should have got the fight. I'm not going to say that it necessarily was a robbery, but what I will say is this. I thought that Brian Castano, if I would have gave it to someone, I would have gave it to Brian Castano. Like what that match is to me, personally, when it comes down to it, it's almost like the Oscar De La Hoya versus Felix Tito Trinidad fight. To where if you take a look at that fight, maybe you could score it a draw, but more than likely, I thought that Oscar De La Hoya probably should have got the decision. It was kind of the same thing here. Except I thought that Castano was more dominant here than maybe what De La Hoya would have been against that of a Tito Trinidad. But anyway.
But let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fannon. Before I get into the subject matter of the video, make sure you guys subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, hit all notifications, and also hit the like before you leave the door. Jermell Charlo, the 154-pound WBA, WBC, and IBF champion, will be rematching the WBO champion, Brian Castano, March 19th. I do believe it is going to be in Los Angeles. Go for undisputed at 154 pounds. The rematch is occurring because of a controversial draw that took place in the last fight, where the fight was pretty much a tale of two different fights. One that was going on when the fighters were up against the ropes, and another fight when the fight was in the center of the ring. Many people believe that Jermell Charlo won the fight. A whole lot of people believe that Brian Castano won the fight.
The comments that I personally read, it seems like about a good 70% of people believe that Brian Castano should have won the fight. And the channels that usually allege that Jermell Charlo has won the fight, I mean, let's be real, who are they usually? It just, it is what it is. All right, as Boxing Ego would usually say in some of his videos, the usual suspects. But that's not me trying to, be rude or anything, or me on and all, trying to start shit. But I mean, let's just be real. It is what it is. Listen, like I said, I'm a very logical and objective commentator. And if I think overall that the fighter won, I think that the fighter won. I don't think that there's any, problem with that. I'm not a person that just alleges that fighters get robbed or all sorts of. I'm not a person that just pulls that out of my ass. And I don't know if I would necessarily say that it was the biggest robbery that I've ever seen, because I think that Brian Castano made it a little bit too close later on down the line. But it was very clear to me, in my opinion, that Brian Castano, if there would have been a victor, it should have been Brian Castano.
Including Brian Castano himself, who says for this fight that he is coming out with a different approach to win the fight, because he doesn't believe that he can get a decision on the scorecards. And so what he is saying...
That's a very intelligent thing to think. What Brian Castano really has to think of in this fight is that he is always going to be behind. So basically, what does that mean? They're just like overall, and I like to have this mindset myself. You pray for the best, you hope for the best, but you expect the worst. So basically what Brian Castano just said there, and what that tells me, is that he's going into this fight with the right mentality. He's going into this fight overall with the right mindset. The judges, if the fight is close, they're not going to give you this fight. That's the same reason, all in all, why they gave it to Jermell Charlo the first time around. And that's the same reason why in the Tony Harrison rematch, they were also giving Jermell Charlo the majority of the scores. And a lot of people, they always say, oh, well, that first Tony Harrison-Jermell Charlo fight was a robbery. No, it wasn't. If you watch that fight, that was a very decently close fight. And one that I thought Tony Harrison just edged out. Now, like I said, if you want to talk about robberies, like flat-out robberies that I've seen, Fury versus Deontay Wilder won the first fight. That, to me, was a robbery. All right, Paul Williams versus Araceli Lara. That was a robbery. All right, Manny Pacquiao versus Timothy Bradley. That was a robbery. Sweet Pea Pernell Whitaker versus Chavez Sr., at least from what I've seen, that was a robbery. All right, all those fights, in my opinion, were robberies. And there may be a few others that, and I'm not even personally thinking of right now. Those fights, in my opinion, were robberies. All right, there's a lot of fights out there that a lot of people claim are robberies that I can't really claim are robberies because they were so close or they could have won either way. That first fight, even though I thought Brian Castano did enough to win, in my opinion, he also let Jermell Charlo get a little bit too much into the fight within those final 4 rounds, especially. He let him hurt him and push him back a little bit too much. In my opinion, Brian Castano, he needs to try to push Jermell Charlo back. I don't think that it's a good idea to really box with him in the middle of the ring. It's not that Brian Castano, in my opinion, can't somewhat box in the middle of the ring, but Jermell Charlo is naturally bigger than you. Not only overall is he taller and has more length against you, I think that he has a bigger stature than Brian Castano. Brian Castano is a person that he fits in 154 decently well, but Brian Castano is not the biggest dude in the world. He's significantly shorter, I believe, than out of a Jermell Charlo. What he's going to have to do, in my opinion, try to work off that jab, throw that left hook in there just like you did in the first fight. And all in all, Jermell Charlo, he will be somewhat dazed by that. He will be off-put by that because neither Charlo brother really knows how to defend a left hook very, very well. Especially Jermell Charlo, the littler brother. Because when it comes down to it, I've seen that happen a multitude of times in the Tony Harrison fights and a few of those other fights. He is not very good at defending the left hook. And he's not. So I think he needs to go to the body early. I think he needs to work off his jab, double jab into the face, mix it up to the body and the head. Keep your hands up constantly, just like you did in the first fight. And then my advice also to Brian Castano would be is this, or Brian Castano, however you pronounce it, also use lateral movement. Basically meaning what? When you're on the back foot, if you ever think that you need to back up, use lateral movement, move side to side. Because I think a big problem that I seen with Brian Castano in the first fight is that sometimes when he would back up in a straight line. And sometimes that makes you a little bit too predictable, and that means that you're going to get hit by an incoming punch because your opponent, of course, can basically guess where you're going to be next. So Brian Castano, in my opinion, he needs to utilize a little bit more head movement. His defense, in my opinion, is always usually pretty decently well. He almost kind of reminds me of, and some people have made these comparisons. He almost kind of reminds me of a better version of Isaac Pitbull Cruz, or almost like an Andrew Ruiz Jr. He's a person that goes in there very decently fast, very decently powerful, short and stout. But if he gets in on you, he's gonna give you hell. But the question is overall about Brian Castano is if he's not on the inside with Jermell Charlo, can he overall make sure that Charlo, does not hit him? Can his defense overall, push through when it comes down to, is he going to use lateral movement? Can he find a way to get Jermell Charlo back on the ropes? And maybe he can still somewhat outbox him in the middle of the ring. Brian Castano, in my opinion, he's a very decent counterpuncher, at least from what I've seen. But when it comes down to it, like I said, I don't know if boxing him the whole entire time in the middle of the ring, especially because I would not say that he's a Canelo Alvarez in terms of getting in and outside the zone. I would say that what Brian Castano really has to do in this fight, you have to push him. You have to push him. I'm not saying that it's always a bad thing maybe to be on the back foot here and there, especially if you maybe want to take a break. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to really push Jermell Charlo the hardest that he's ever been pushed.
Is that he is going in there
because neither Charlo brother are actually that good when they're actually pushed on the back foot and someone able to bully them a little bit. They're somewhat limited.
knowing full well that he has got to go at Jermell Charlo, and he predicts that he is going to knock Jermell Charlo out during this rematch. Now, the thing that this reminds me of is,
like I said, I would not be surprised if either man ended up getting knocked out. It almost kind of reminds me of the Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder rematch when it comes down to it. A lot of people, and then now let me clarify because, some people, that's going to go over their heads. I remember I had this one dude, when I was talking about the Canelo versus Jermell Charlo situation, someone was like, oh my God, you're comparing Charlo to Deontay Wilder. And it completely went over this dude's head. No, that's not what I'm saying. But the reason why I say this is because a lot of people, when they take a look at it, they're going to be expecting Jermell Charlo. If anyone's going to get a knockout here, they're more than likely expecting it to be that of a Jermell Charlo. I think Brian Castano has about just as good of a chance as getting the knockout, and I kind of thought that when it came to the Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder rematch because Fury actually has some very decent power. Brian Castano does as well, and he's a person that with his style, he can give Jermell Charlo a decent amount of problems. He's an Argentine fighter when it comes down to it. He's a very good pressure fighter. He's good defensively. He has great, stamina when it comes down, at least from what I've seen. But I do need to see a little bit more head movement and lateral movement from him. And also in some of those rounds, if it ends up going to the middle of the ring, you are going to have to push Jermell Charlo back. You are going to have to work off your jab. Because if you box in the middle of the ring with Jermell Charlo, more than likely Jermell Charlo is going to have the advantage. He's bigger than you. He has a bigger stature. Overall he has a pretty decent jab for his size when it comes down to it. You're the shorter fighter. You basically have to get in there working on your jab when it comes down to it. Get them hooks to the body. Get that left hook up to the top early when it comes down to it. That's what you have to do. I'm not saying that you have to, be on the gas the whole entire time. But, in my opinion, Brian Castano, the majority of the time, he probably should try to pressure Jermell Charlo. And all in all, if he is in the middle of the ring, try to outmaneuver him. All right, and then maybe try to trap him in the corner once again, because Jermell Charlo is very, very uncomfortable with that.
Because most people are going to come out and say there's no way that Brian Castano is going to knock out Jermell Charlo in this rematch. And it reminds me of the Deontay Wilder fight versus Tyson Fury, where they...
I agree with you, sir. I agree with you. Thank you for bringing that up. Basically, he sees the same thing that I see, which is that Brian Castano, if he plays his cards right, and if he actually goes in here super duper motivated, which I believe that he is, and if he goes in here with the right game plan, he actually can not only hurt Jermell Charlo, he can knock him out. Now, do I think that is likely? I'm not going to say that it's super duper likely, but if it happened, I wouldn't be surprised. Let me just say that.
He had to draw the first fight. Tyson Fury says, in order to get a decision, he's going to have to come out and do something different. He comes out and he knocks out Deontay Wilder, and he knocks out Deontay Wilder in the third fight. All of the drama associated with his gloves and all that to the side. As soon as I heard Brian Castano say that, that's the first thing that came to my mind. Because and I will tell you that I do not think that this is something that is let me put it this way. If that is what he is trying to do, somebody in that fight is going to get knocked out for sure. It's either going to be Jermell Charlo or it is going to be Brian Castano. One of the two of those dudes are going to get knocked out. As far as it being Brian Castano, I do not believe that he's going to be able to do that. However, I will tell you something that I did notice in the first fight that I didn't think would be the case.
Just advice to Brian Castano, and I'll, give advice to Jermell Charlo here in a minute as well. I'll say what both fighters, in my opinion, need to do. But if Brian Castano, just for example, if he's going to defeat that of a Jermell Charlo, keep your hands up, just like what Andy Ruiz and Isaac Pitbull Cruz did, and just like you did in that first fight. Keep your hands up, work in on your jab, shoot that jab overall to the body and to the head very early, try to trap him up against the ropes, try to get him in the corner, shoot a very good left hook and a very good left hook overall to the body and also to the head, because neither Charlo brother really defend a left hook very, very well, but especially Jermell Charlo. If you watch those Tony Harrison fights, Tony Harrison was able to hit him with left hooks almost a lot of the times in pretty much both fights, and he's not the only one that's been able to do that. So you need to get that left hook in there. Maybe come in with a good right cross, maybe to the body as well. Overall, maybe a good left, good right. You could, hit one to the body, hit one overall to the head. Brian Castano, in my opinion, the left hook is going to be majorly key in this fight, just like it was in the last fight. But you have to go to the body early, in my opinion. Also go up to the head. Show him that you are not 100% afraid of his power. Because Jermell Charlo, when it comes down to a big part of the reason why he's won some of those bigger fights at that division is because a lot of these fighters, and I'm not saying that all of them, I still give Jermell Charlo credit, but Jermell Charlo, kind of like when I just take a look at David Benavidez or Jermell Charlo, he's not usually used to someone overall not respecting his power to a great degree, or someone all in all that, is just not completely intimidated by it. And I think that kind of threw him off in the beginning of the fight when it came down to it. And I think that Brian Castano, he has to be very defensively responsible. He has to try to move in and out of the zone. The problem is that I don't know if Brian Castano can do that like someone like a Canelo Alvarez. Canelo, when I take a look at him fight, of course, a lot of people, they'll say that Canelo, that he doesn't have necessarily a great feet all the time, although that may be true to a degree. Canelo knows how to get in and out of the zone. Like when you take a look at him against Gennady Triple G Golovkin or Danny Jacobs, like against Gennady Triple G Golovkin in the rematch, he's moving in and out the whole entire time. And that's what great boxers do. They move in and out. They shoot certain angles. They shoot feints. Can Brian Castano do that in the rematch? We'll see. Hopefully for his sake he will, but we'll see.
He actually was able to rock Jermell Charlo in an exchange one time.
Yes, he was, and it wasn't only just once. He was able to rock him multiple times. You could tell that Jermell Charlo, that he was feeling that power early. Credit to Jermell Charlo though, because of course he did adjust a little bit later on, and maybe you can argue that he pulled out some of them final rounds. I still thought that Brian Castano did enough to win the fight, but it is what it is.
And really did, buckle him up against the rope. So Brian Castano definitely has enough strength in his punches to hurt Jermell Charlo, and I think that may have had something to do with why Jermell Charlo was reluctant really to let his hands go when he was up against those ropes, because he didn't want to get caught again, right? And so when Brian Castano comes into this second fight, Brian Castano's probably going to be a lot more confident, is going to be a lot more aggressive. And when he's confident and aggressive, he lets his hand go, he may be able to catch Jermell Charlo.
If Brian Castano is somewhat able to pace himself early, and if he's able to move in and out of the zone, and if he's able to work off his jab overall, go to the body early, and get that left hook in there early, and if he's able to consistently get Jermell Charlo up against the ropes, I actually don't see how Jermell Charlo wins this fight, because that pretty much is his kryptonite. If you're able to push him backwards when it comes down to it, and on top of that, if you're able to somewhat show him that you also have power, like, I watch a lot of these videos, and these certain people, they say, oh, well, Canelo, all he needs is, to face someone with power, and, then basically, he'll be, his downfall will come. Canelo has been in the ring overall with people that have real deal power. I've seen him against Sergey Kovalev. I've seen him against Danny Jacobs, Miguel Cotto, Gennady Triple G Golovkin, Callum Smith. He was able to beat every single one of those guys. So Canelo Alvarez is not just a one-trick pony. Now, I don't think that Jermell Charlo is necessarily a one-trick pony either, but you can get to him a little bit mentally, I think, overall in the fight, if you're able to get to him early on in the fight. Because Jermell Charlo relies a lot on his power. And all in all, when it comes down, and I'm not saying that maybe Canelo Alvarez does not, but he also, in my opinion, in terms of his style, he's more skill-based. Jermell Charlo, if he sees early on in the fight that maybe you don't 100% respect his power or some of his other opponents, he's going to be thrown off a little bit, in my opinion. It's kind of the same thing with Jermell Charlo. That's why Jermell Charlo was not able to knock out Juan Montiel in his last fight, because once he's seen that Juan Montiel not only maybe did not 100%, not necessarily did not respect his power, but that he could take it, that's when Jermell Charlo, he said, wow, he kind of panicked, and all in all, he basically thought that he had to go swinging for the fence and try to knock this dude out. So either that's going to happen, or when it comes down to it, he's going to be a little bit reluctant to throw. That's what happens when boxers, all in all, that's what happens when, they get a little bit timid and they get a little bit scared and they say, wow, my power's not affecting this dude like usual. They either do what Deontay Wilder and Jermell Charlo do. They try to go swinging for the fences and basically say, I'm going to try to land every shot that I can on this motherfucker. Or basically, they get a little bit timid and they start not to throw as much. So we'll see overall what happens. Jermell Charlo seems like in certain situations that he'll swing for the fences if he needs to, as long as he is not being pressured correctly. But he can hurt Brian Castano. He knows that. So Brian Castano is going to have to be careful in this fight. He's going to have to get his respect early, and we'll see all in all what happens.
Jermell Charlo was something. Now, on the other hand, on the other side of that same thing.
So some people may ask, well, you just said all in all that pressuring him and getting to him early and basically realizing that his power may not affect him as much, that's his kryptonite. So why would you say that he swings for the fences and swings back? Because that can be a kryptonite. If someone overall realizes, just like Deontay Wilder in the Tyson Fury fight, once Deontay Wilder realized that Tyson Fury, that overall, not necessarily that he wasn't going to be affected by the power, but once he got past overall that right hand and basically his reach and basically his game plan, his A game plan, which is pretty much all Deontay Wilder has when he's at his best, he said, oh shit. And basically what Deontay Wilder had to do is that he had to swing that right hand repeatedly. He didn't even attempt to throw anything else because he said, if I don't get this right hand in here, I'm screwed. I can't win this fight. And when it comes to Jermell Charlo, he's kind of similar. It's similar with the Charlo brothers. If they see all in all that, they can't, necessarily 100% intimidate you with their power and with their size, sometimes they'll get a little bit timid or they won't throw as much, or sometimes they'll swing for the fences. Either or, you can take advantage of it. Because the Charlo brothers, sometimes they're not always the most technically sound. It's not that they don't have technical abilities, they do. But Jermell Charlo, he can be open for certain punches sometimes, especially when he's swinging for the fences. But Brian Castano, he's going to have to be very patient at certain times, keep his guard up, and don't get intimidated. But we'll see what happens.
Is that Brian Castano, even by his own admission, got hurt by Jermell Charlo, and if he's opening up in the middle of the ropes, if he's opening up in the middle of the ring, where Jermell Charlo can take a step back and take a step to the side more easily, then he really does open up the possibility that he himself gets knocked out, which I would suspect, is the better chance. However,
if I were going to go with a prediction, I think that the safe prediction would be to go with Jermell Charlo, because of course he is the person that is the unified champion. And I think that maybe you could argue that he was able to hurt Brian Castano a little bit more than what Castano was able to hurt him a little bit later on down the line. But this is really a fight that could go either way. And, like I said, I'm going to give my official prediction, the day of the fight, or not the day of the fight, but probably a week before the fight. I'm very excited for this fight. I don't necessarily think that Brian Castano or Jermell Charlo are necessarily a Canelo Alvarez, but it is still very interesting to watch because this is a 50-50 fight, and I do consider both of these fighters at least A- fighters. And whoever is the winner of this fight, well, in my opinion, if Brian Castano is able to win this fight, he could be potentially a very, very big challenge to that of a Terrence Bud Crawford or Errol Spence Jr. I think that if Jermell Charlo ends up winning this fight, and if a unification fight happens between him and Terrence Bud Crawford or Errol Spence Jr., I don't really see how he beats either of those fighters. Because those fighters, they're going to be able to handle his power more than likely, or they're going to be able to avoid it, and they're just basically going to completely outbox Jermell Charlo, in my opinion. Where Brian Castano, in my opinion, he actually has the better boxing ability and the better boxing craft. The big question is, will he be able to come up with a good enough game plan or multitude of game plans? Will he be able to get Jermell Charlo's respect early, and will he be able to win that fight? We'll see what happens.
My take on it is that I don't see a knockout coming in this particular fight. But I will tell you that the fact that that fight is going to be in LA, and after what happened in the first fight, where a lot of people got behind Brian Castano and thought Brian Castano won that fight, depending on what the makeup of that crowd is out there in LA, you may hear significantly more cheers, raucous cheers for Brian Castano, and Brian Castano may get more of the benefit of the doubt from the announcers and everybody around there. And because so many people thought that Brian Castano won the first fight between the two. So, his aggression, while Brian Castano thinks that he needs to get a knockout to win because he doesn't know what the judges will do to get him, get him a shot, in order for him to get the decision. Because he said he said he won like eight, either he said he either won 7 or 8 rounds of that fight.
I think that he's right on the money with that. That's exactly pretty much what I would have scored it as well. But Brian Castano, I think that he's coming into the fight with the right mentality, which basically is what, basically survival of the fittest. Basically I'm going to have to claw, my way out of this situation, or, when it comes to fighting this dude, I'm going to have to put on the performance of a lifetime, or I'm not going to come out of this fight as the victor. It just is what it is. And I think that Brian Castano, he knows that if he is coming into the fight with that mindset, he's coming in here with the right mindset. If you're a boxer, in my opinion, and if you're, facing someone in a professional bout, I don't care who you are. When it comes down to it, you should try to outbox that boxer every minute, every single second, every single millisecond, every single round of the fight, no matter who you're fighting. Doesn't matter, because you never know what these judges are going to look at it as. But we'll see what happens.
Personal belief is no, you need to be happy. He won a good part of that fight in the beginning of the fight, and then Jermell Charlo took over in the middle part of the fight, and then the fight got closer again towards the end of the fight. But there was round after round after round that Jermell Charlo was putting in the bank. And what I think is most likely going to happen in this next fight is that Jermell Charlo is going to start putting rounds in the bank from the very beginning of the fight, keep Brian Castano keep himself off of the ropes, and keep that fight in the middle of the ring, and also sit down on his punches a little bit more.
Just to talk about Jermell Charlo, and in my opinion, the advice that I would give him, all in all, and what, in my opinion, he would need to do. First of all, work off that jab. You're the person that's more lengthy. You have a decent reach over him, I believe, or at least you seem to. You have a decent height over him, so it may be a little bit harder for Castano to hit you. Work off that jab. Throw uppercuts when he comes on the inside. Brian Castano seems to have a little bit of that peekaboo style, but we'll see all in all what happens. Throw that right cross right down the pocket when it comes down to it, disguise it with the jab, because Brian Castano, one thing I noticed about him is that he was not avoiding that right cross very, very well. He's actually very lucky, to be quite honest with you, that he didn't get knocked down in one of those later rounds. But all in all, when it comes down to it, that would be my advice to Jermell Charlo. Also, same with Brian Castano when it comes down to it. Just like I'll tell Jermell Charlo, go to the body of Brian Castano early. When it comes down to it, maybe with a hook, maybe you can, shoot the jab out there, maybe to the head, double jab, then maybe throw a little right hook to the body, go on the inside. Another thing about Jermell Charlo is this. He also is going to have to use lateral movement in this fight. Because if he just backs up straight to the ropes like he did in the first fight, there's a very decent possibility that he could lose this fight very dominantly. And Brian Castano, in my opinion, actually is the more talented fighter. But I've seen certain fights where I thought that the more talented fighter ended up losing the fight because they did not put their best foot forward, or they did not, employ the right strategy. Jermell Charlo, what he's going to have to hope for is that maybe he can hurt Brian Castano early, or that his lateral movement is going to throw him off, and that maybe he can have this fight in the middle of the ring. Because that overall will be, more than likely to the disadvantage to Brian Castano. But we'll see what happens.
Probably use more of a jab to the body, a scoring jab to the body, a la Errol Spence Jr., in order to, wear down and open up the guard of Brian Castano. But, all in all, man, I'm telling you, I'm really, really excited about this fight. And the months of March, April, May, is starting to look really, really, really solid, man. You got the Errol Spence Jr. fight that they're saying, with Yordanis Ugas should be taking place in April. We got definitely going to have a Canelo Alvarez fight. Hopefully, a Canelo Alvarez versus Jermell Charlo fight in May. You got this fight with Jermell Charlo for undisputed against Brian Castano in March. It's just really, it's really starting to look up as far as the quality of the fights that are going. Also, you're going to have that Gervonta Davis Rolly Romero fight going on. So it's just looking like the year is starting to form.
I'm not really truly interested in the Gervonta Davis versus Rolly Romero fight, but I may get it all in all just to give my little fight review. I think that it's pretty much going to be, a slaughter within 7 rounds at most, but we'll see what happens.
Formulate pretty well, and these are some really, really good fights, man. I didn't like the fact that it had a draw the first time, but at least this time, it allows us to have a second fight, and I wouldn't be surprised if if it's a really close fight, that they may not run it back a third time. But as far as the prediction of him knocking out Jermell Charlo, he's going to really have to bring something extra to the table to make sure that he does that. I'm not sure how he's going to do that, because that's going to mean he's going to have to fight and open up more in the middle of the ring. And one of the things about the way that Brian Castano fought Jermell is it was very similar in my recollection to the way that Isaac Cruz fought Gervonta Davis, where when he's in the middle of the ring and he's coming forward, he's really tucked up underneath a guard, which allows Gervonta Davis.
I would so agree with you, Fannon. I think all in all that's not the worst of comparisons, but the only thing I'll say is this. Jermell Charlo is nowhere near the talent or overall the boxer or the artist that a Gervonta Tank Davis is. He doesn't have the boxing IQ. He doesn't have the same power, even though he has very good power for his division. He doesn't have the same movement. He doesn't have overall the same lateral movement. He does not have the same skill set as a Gervonta Tank Davis. If Brian Castano, in my opinion, is able to get to him early, just like he was able to in that last fight, and is able to consistently keep him on the ropes, but not only that, employ the jab, use lateral movement, get out of the zone here and there when you need to, kind of like what a Canelo Alvarez does, or if you need to take a break, make sure that you use lateral movement and keep the hands up when it comes down to keep the hands up. You can't overall just kind of take breaks like what you did in some of those final rounds, like what you did in the last fight, because Jermell Charlo will be able to land on you. And he's going to have to employ, in my opinion, a little bit of better head movement in this fight as well. But we'll see what happens.
To score points just by jabbing him, in the perception of a lot of people, right? Jabbing him to the stomach, even if he's hitting him on his gloves and on his hands and his elbow, he's more active and throwing combination punches and all that when the guy is coming forward. And then he only did his work when he was up against the ropes. And so it didn't work for Isaac Cruz. Didn't work for Brian Castano. They're going to have to go out there and mix it up more in the middle of the ring, in my opinion, for Brian Castano to pull that fight out. But I'm looking forward to it any way it goes. Hey, you let me know what you think in the comment section. Do you think that Brian Castano can pull out the knockout, or is it going to be Jermell Charlo by knockout, a decision? What do you guys think? Anyway, that's my take on the matter. You let me know what you think in the comment section. And with that, I'm out. Peace.
But anyways, it looks like that's pretty much about it for this video. But I'm very excited for this fight as well, because I think all in all that it's a very interesting fight. Just to answer Mr. Fannon's question, do I think that there is a possibility that maybe Brian Castano could get the knockout? I don't think that it's impossible. Let me just say that. Could Jermell Charlo also get the knockout? That's not impossible either. So we'll see what happens. If I had to guess, more than likely we're going to see a decision. The safe option, of course, would be good to go with Jermell Charlo, and that's usually what I go with. I'm a person that, is very decently logical, so I usually tend to go with a little bit more of the safe option with, my logical predictions, but I could easily see Brian Castano winning this fight as well. I will have to rewatch the first fight once again, but we'll see all in all what happens. But we'll see. Both of these fighters, in my opinion, they're going to have to employ a very decent jab. They're going to have to use lateral movement. They're going to have better head movement than what they did before, but I just don't know if they can do that. But we'll see all in all what happens. But we'll see. It'll be a very, very interesting fight, and I'll give my full breakdown overall when it's about probably a week, maybe 2 before the fight, but we'll see what happens. But anyways, that's pretty much all I got for today. Thank you so much for watching. Talk to you all later.